The story of Nosferatu is a fascinating one. In case you're not familiar, Nosferatu began as an unsanctioned adaptation of Bram Stoker's seminal novel Dracula. Released in 1922 from director F.W. Murnau and starring Max Schreck as Count Graf Orlok. It's a somewhat faithful adaptation of the novel and a masterpiece of film horror worthy of a watch even over 100 years later. Its very existence today is actually nothing short of a miracle itself. Stoker's widow Florence sued the makers of Nosferatu for infringing on her late husband's work without permission. The courts wound up ruling in her favor, and all copies of Nosferatu were ordered destroyed. Most were, but a few prints managed to survive, and solely because of that, the world was not deprived of this horror masterpiece. Score one for intellectual property theft, eh? Nosferatu has been rightly praised over the years and has been remade a few times, most notably in 1979 by Werner Herzog with Klaus Kinski filling Orlok's shoes, and it was lovingly satirized in the 2000 film Shadow of the Vampire, which tells the story of the making of Murnau's classic with the twist that Max Schreck actually is a vampire. It's a really fun movie and serendipitously stars none other than Willem Dafoe as the vampire count. Fast forward to this, the year of our Lord 2024, and we have another remake, this time coming from Robert Eggers. Eggers is a director that has yet to miss with me. His previous movies, The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman, are all excellent, and they really feel like movies from a different era. An era where storytelling and the actual craft of filmmaking is paramount, rather than how modern mainstream movies forego all that story and craft nonsense to sermonize with ideological propaganda and try to dazzle audiences with empty CGI vomit. Eggers' story-first approach to filmmaking used to be the norm, but sadly, that's not the case these days, and so his movies really feel like breaths of fresh air. But enough jibba-jabba. We're here to talk about Nosferatu, so let's get on with it. If you're at all familiar with the story of Dracula, then you pretty much already know the major beats of Nosferatu's story. Thomas Hutter is sent by his firm to handle a land purchase by a rather peculiar client, one Count Orlok of Romania. Against his new bride Ellen's pleas for him to not go on the trip, he embarks anyway, and soon finds himself in a strange land with an even stranger host. Back in Germany, Ellen has bizarre nightmares that seem to portend horrible things for Thomas, and it's not long before these terrible visions begin to manifest in reality. Quite quickly, but still far too late, Thomas realizes that Count Orlok is utterly evil and has terrible plans for him. He barely manages to escape with his life and makes it back to Germany, where he and those around him learn a terrifying truth. Orlok is coming, and everyone will suffer. With little time, the small group must figure out how to stop Count Orlok and decide if the means to stop him is a price they're willing to pay. Right off the bat, Eggers knocks it out of the park again. Nosferatu is pure gothic horror of the highest degree. The story unfolds in a fairly brisk pace, yet still finds the time to build some amazing tension. There are moments where the movie takes its time, but never does it feel like it drags. There was this one scene where the audience I was watching it with was so quiet you could feel the tension in the theater. It was electric. The pacing of this movie is fantastic. The cinematography is likewise excellent. Get used to that word, folks. The colors are very muted, and some scenes are practically monochromatic, not only hearkening back to Nosferatu's black and white roots, but giving a very appropriately cold, sickly feel to the film. There's lots of really cool symmetrical shots too, where the subject is dead center in the frame. And there's also lots of shots of archways, which the original also had, which I just kind of thought was a really cool callback. Performance-wise, everyone does a great job. Nicholas Hoult is good as Thomas Hutter, going from a loving husband eager to give his new bride the life she deserves, to a terrified man being hunted as prey. Aaron Taylor Johnson likewise turns in a good performance as Friedrich Harding, friend to Thomas and a loving husband and father. Now this kind of brings me to a bit of a sidebar that sadly I feel like I have to point out. the fact that the men in this movie are portrayed in an old-fashioned way, as competent, capable, masculine men who genuinely love their families and care about those they're charged with protecting. They're not incompetent oafs or bungling doormats. They're strong and resilient and rise to face a challenge that would be over anyone's heads. It kinda sucks that since men are so rarely written like that nowadays, it actually sticks out when they are. But these guys are written like that, and it's great. Anyway, back on track. Ralph Ineson, a Robert Eggers alum, is Dr. Severs, who's called in when Ellen begins having her bizarre episodes. He has one of the rare sort of funnier moments in the movie, perhaps unintentionally, perhaps not, when he's diagnosing Ellen and prescribing treatment. It's played 100% seriously, as it should be, since this was the state of medicine at the time, but we, the enlightened modern-day audience, can't help but chuckle a little bit at the treatments he recommends. I mean, I thought it was kind of funny anyway. Then there's Willem Dafoe as the Van Helsing character, Professor von Franz, and he's Willem Dafoe, so of course he's great. Bill Skarsgård is excellent as Count Orlok. I'm not familiar with anything else he's done, mainly due to him not being in anything I'm interested in. I've never been a fan of It, and I really hate the design of his Pennywise, so I never bothered with that, and you ain't getting me within 500 yards of that blasphemous piece of shit calling itself The Crow. But in this, he's fantastic. The makeup and costume are superb, and his characterization is pitch perfect. There is nothing sexy or sensual or even charming about him. Orlok is cold, dominating, and utterly malignant, and unlike other versions of Dracula, he doesn't even pretend to care how he comes across. There's no guile or false niceness. You will do as he says simply because he commands it. This is a being who sees humans as utterly beneath him as the animals he controls. The real surprise to me, though, is Lily Rose Depp. Now, I'll admit to a bit of Nepo baby prejudice on my part. Both she and Skarsgård are the children of famous actors, and there's no doubt that they got to cut to the front of that line. But both are great, and she really turns in a hell of a performance here. The only other thing I've seen her in is The King with Timothée Chalamet, and her part in that was kind of small, and I didn't really get a gauge on her acting chops. But here, boy, she proves her ability. She conveys all the emotions and delivers all her lines convincingly, but it's the physical element of her part that really knocked me out. If she did all the weird convulsions and stuff physically herself without aid from special effects, then color me very impressed. It has this really unnatural look and disturbing effect. It looks like it could be special effects, but if it's just her, then wow. Speaking of the special effects, they too are fantastic. As I said, Bill Skarsgård looks amazing as Count Orlok, like a literal walking pestilence. There are also some excellent subtle special effects. The opening scene with the curtains is a new all-timer for me, baby. It's fucking awesome. There are also one or two scenes where Thomas Hutter is following Orlok in his castle, only for Orlok to disappear right in front of his eyes and reappear in an unexpected place. But Orlok doesn't simply vanish, it's more like how a magician will misdirect you and then pull a card from somewhere it can't possibly have gotten. It's a really cool subtle effect, and if you're paying attention, I'll mention specifically the spiral staircase scene. Pay attention to that scene and you'll see what I mean. It's really cool. Scenes with Orlok's shadow moving along the wall are another great callback to the original and are super effective and just look great. Also, I could be wrong here. Maybe I am, but in one shot I could swear that they used an honest-to-goodness matte painting, and I hope that's the case because I love matte paintings. All in all, Robert Eggers' Nosferatu is phenomenal, and it's my best movie for 2024. Not that that's a very high bar. It's faithful to its source without being slavishly so. It's genuinely scary without reverting to cheap thrills. It's a much more cerebral horror movie, but without being pretentious. It doesn't treat the viewer like an idiot. It wants to scare you, not simply shock you with over-the-top gore or startle you with weak-ass jump scares. Instead, its horror comes from the crushing sense of dread. Count Orlok is a plague that is settling over the lives of the people in the movie, and it feels like there's nothing anyone can do to stop him. His evil isn't flashy or showy, it's subtle and malignant. Every piece of this movie, the cinematography, the performances, the costumes, the sets, the effects, the soundtrack, all of them come together to form a whole that will stick with you long after you've left the theater. And this one will be terrifying viewers for years to come. Hands down, best movie of the year and an instant classic.